Hey, alright, jumping in today, we're going to be looking at InDesign, and we're going to be making a little menu here and just going over the introductory stuff that you would need to know to get started with InDesign. This is going to be a little bit more graphic design, kind of principle heavy than it is strictly technical InDesign stuff, so we're going to be talking about things that you want to look out for and stuff you want to be aware of. InDesign is a page layout application, but it is really, really handy for all sorts of things. You can do your presentations in InDesign, you can do interactive things in InDesign. Lots and lots of stuff that you can do with it, and really probably my go-to for just organizing files and creating anything that you want to send to other people. But its bread and butter is making books and page layout where you're going to be dealing with a lot of text or a lot of images, and you want to keep everything looking consistent and nice across all of the different pages. Now, before you can do anything with InDesign, obviously you need some content to work with. So you would need some images. I have a few images here. The links for those are going to be in the description if you want to download those exact ones. You're also going to need some text, at least for this example. I've got this in a Word document, but in the description I'll link a Google Docs where you can just copy out this text. It's just lorem ipsum text, but I have formatted it a little bit to kind of mimic a menu. So this is going to be an A4 menu. You can find that preset under Print. So if you go to Print Presets, View All Presets, there's an A4 size right here. And I'm going to be using millimeters. You can use whatever units you want, but I'm going to go ahead and use millimeters for this. Now, the size of an A4 is a little bit wonky. It's 210 by 297. It's not really an even division, and we'll talk about that with regards to our columns and our margins and our bleed here. Whenever you're setting up a document, InDesign has this really, really handy grid system where you can add columns. So you can have a 2 or 3 column layout. We're going to end up using a 3 column layout, but I'm going to be using 6 columns in order to do it. But you can do a lot of different stuff with it. The grid is really, really handy. The thing about grids, though, is that you want to make sure that stuff stays proportional, and you want to make sure everything has, you know, really kind of the same heights, those same numbers show up again and again and again. A quick way to do that is to use factors. I know creative people are going to go, ugh, math, factors. Fortunately, though, there are websites now that will help you out with that. So you can Google this. There's a generator that will tell you the greatest common factor of two numbers. So in this case, you put in the 210 and 297, and the greatest common factor of those is 3. There's 3 millimeters. Not a terribly easy measurement to work with. Not much we can do with that. In this case, we're just going to round this up because it's almost 300 anyway, and not enough that we would notice. That 3 millimeter difference just isn't going to be that much. But if we do 210 and 300, all of a sudden we get a greatest common factor of 30, and then of that we've got a number of other factors. We can use like 5 and 6, 15 and 10 and 2 and 3, lots of different numbers that we can use here for our sizes. This is one of those things that you don't really think about, but when you see it, things just seem to fit together better. Stuff just kind of fits. It feels more proportional, it feels more organized. And so we're going to use a factor of 5 for the gutter, which the gutter is the space between our columns here. And we're going to use margins. We're going to set those to 15 millimeters, just a little bit more than the 12.7 that they are currently. 15 millimeters is just a little bit bigger. So now each of our margins is exactly 3 of the gutter. And so that little difference, you don't see it specifically, but when it's not there, something might feel off. If you look at 2 pages that are organized with slightly different grids, and one of them has been set up with factors, you'll see that difference. And it's just a little bit, everything fits a little bit better. Okay, so 6 columns. Why 6 columns? This is going to be a 3 column layout. Anytime, though, that you use an even number of columns, so we've got 3 columns here. If you use an even number, then you also get to have that division right in the middle, just in case. It just gives us a little bit more flexibility. I can make my text box 3 columns wide, and it'll be right in the middle, or I can make it 4 columns wide, and then that will end up taking up a total of these two left columns. So this makes it just a little bit more flexible, where we can use a half page or a full page, or use either a 3 or a 2 column layout. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click Create, and it's created our document. Before we jump in and start adding things, we're going to look at the Pages menu here. This is should be in the default workspace. Let's go ahead and reset this. Just make sure that we're looking at the same thing, because yours probably looks a little bit different than mine. So this is what you'll see when you first open InDesign is Essentials. And let's actually go ahead and reset Essentials too, just to make sure that we're looking at the same thing. So you're probably looking at something like this, where you have the properties, pages, and your CC libraries over here. We're not going to be using the CC libraries for this, so we won't need that. I do prefer to have this command bar at the top, and you can find that under Window, Control. That's your, sorry, not command bar, the control bar. I don't particularly like having the properties menu out for everything. I just feel like it's a little bit clunky, and I like having quick access to stuff up here. I don't know why they removed it from the default layouts in the new version of InDesign, but they did. But you can bring it back, so it's just another extra step that Adobe makes you go through to bring back that menu. So let's look at pages. Right now we have one page. This is a right side page, so when we start adding pages here, you'll see that they kind of come out in this little layout here like this, where we've got our first page is on the right side, the second page is on the left side, third page on the right side again, and fourth page is on the left side. This is a 4-page layout. It would essentially open up like a book, where this first page would be the cover, the second page would be the inside cover, third page would be the inside back cover, and then fourth page would be the back cover. So this would just basically print out one big piece of paper and you fold it in the middle. Pretty simple setup. Now, for this, we're only going to be making this 2 pages, but we do want those pages to be facing pages. This is the default layout, is to make these facing pages. And if you want to change that, you can change that in your document setup. But we're going to leave it as is. And before we move forward, we're going to go ahead and look at masters. So let's say, for instance, you weren't happy with your column layout. You wanted to change something after you had already created the document. Well, you can do that, but you want to do it from the masters page. If you change anything for the layout for page 1 here, for example, go ahead and go to layout here. You can go to our margins and columns and say, well, here I want to have only 4 columns, or let's do 3 columns on this page 1. Double click on it to jump to it, so we know that we're looking at that. So that one's going to be 3 columns. However, that hasn't affected any of these others. So 2 and 3 are both 6, and 4 is also 6 column layout. If we want to make it affect every page in the document, we want to use a master, and that's what masters are for. You can make additional masters. By default, it starts with just the 1. So I'm going to double click on this A master, and I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift and click on the second page. So you can affect individual pages. We have the left page and the right page of this spread. A spread is 2 pages put together like this. You can select both of them and go ahead and edit parts of that. So if I wanted to make this a 3 column layout here, I could decrease the number of columns for those. Set it to 3, click OK, and then we'll see that it applies to all of these. Everything that has this A master applied is going to have that column layout, or whatever we do on that applied. Now we can change this individually, since this one has a different layout than the others. But I'm just going to go ahead and go back in here. I'm going to go to layout again, margins and columns. Let's set this back up to 6. That's what I want to use ultimately. Now this one is still set to 3, but that's okay. We're going to delete that page anyway, so I'm just going to drag that one to the trash. Actually, we're going to drag this one to the trash as well. And you notice as I delete those, they just kind of disappear out of the stack. So let's go ahead and start making some content on here. We're going to start with our text. First and foremost, in any kind of layout like this is going to be the text, and making your text readable and functional. You don't want to cause undue strain or make it difficult to find information. Really, your goal with anything like this is to make it organized and to make it easier to understand the information and to kind of categorize and understand different sections. So we're going to be using font hierarchy to make sure that our different sections for our menu items, like our appetizers or soups, etc., are all clearly marked. And we're going to use different text blocks and images to support that. That's really what everything is doing. It's not about the imagery, it's not about the fonts. Everything is all about supporting organization of information, making stuff as accessible as possible so that people can sit down and instantly be able to figure out what menu item is in which category. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my text in from Word here. I'm just going to select all, so Control A, Command A if you're on a Mac, Control Command C to copy, and we'll go back over here to InDesign and Command V to paste, and it'll bring in a text box automatically. And when we paste in text, it'll automatically create a text box for us. Now, you'll see this little plus, this red plus sign. What that means is that not all of the text is visible within that box. We can make the box bigger, but you'll see it takes quite a large box in order to see all that. Even if we make it full page, we're still not seeing everything. No, there we go. We can make it, it's everything if we make it take up that, really the entire page. This is not particularly easy to read, and it's not particularly attractive to look at. Of course, this could be a menu, but it's not going to work very well for our purposes because it just doesn't, it's kind of hard to tell where our different sections are. If you look, you can find entrees here, and if you look, you can find desserts, but we want to make it easier for people to understand where those different sections are. We also want to make it easier for people to see the prices and to see the divisions between different dishes. So to do that, we're going to start breaking up this into sections. Now, a word on this, one way that we could break this up would be to thread the text between multiple boxes. This is a handy tool if you don't really mind where your text is going. If it's a longer section of text and it's just it's one large block, you can thread one big box like this to another smaller box by clicking on that little plus sign. So if we select it and make sure that you have your little selection tool active, click on the little plus sign, and as you move your mouse cursor over this other box, you'll notice it changes to a little chain link. That means that we're going to link those together. So if I click on that now, it's going to take whatever text didn't fit in this first box and it's going to flow into the next one. So now I can make this box bigger. You'll see that it goes all the way down to here. Now if I make this box smaller, it's going to push more text into that second box. This is, again, great if you have stuff, really long section, maybe if you've got a chapter in a book or something that's going to flow to multiple sections and you want to just be able to quickly have it flow from box to box around images. However, in this case, we have very specific sections that need to stick together. So desserts really need to all stay together. Entrees really all need to stay together. And so this isn't going to be the best layout for this. We don't want it to automatically break to different boxes. We're going to have to manually set up our boxes. So I'm going to start doing that and break this up into different boxes. So to do this, I'm just going to quickly double click in here. We'll select all of our soups. Control X to cut. So Control X will cut. Click out of here and then just hit Control V. It'll make a new text box. I'm going to take the same thing. We'll move these around once we've got everything kind of in place. Let's take the salads. Again, Control X to cut. Click outside of there and hit Control V to paste it. So now we see it's adding another box here. So we've got these two different text boxes. I'm going to go in here. Let's go ahead and get all the entrees. Again, Control X to cut. Just click outside and Control V. Let's go ahead and get all the desserts. Control X, click outside, Control V. And let's get the footer, Control X, click outside and Control V. And then this original box, this will end up being the header. Now we do have a bunch of broken lines here. So we've got a bunch of these extra enter or line breaks here. And you can't see them as is, but we can turn that on so we can actually see the different line breaks. So and that's kind of handy. We are going to want to do that later. So I'm going to go to Type, And we can go down to show hidden characters here at the bottom. So what that'll do is show characters that don't normally show up, like paragraph characters, tabs, spaces, things like that. So we can actually see these white space characters and delete them so that they're not causing problems with our layout. So I can size this box down now to just the text. Let's move these out of the way. Same thing here. Let's check if that's... Alright, so that's going to be on our footer. Desserts and entrees are also going to be... All that stuff is going to be on the second page. So I'm going to select those. Now a quick way to move around in here is to hold space, and then you can click and drag, and you can pan from one page to another rather than having to click and jump around here. We can pan from one to the next. I'm going to select all of those, and we're just going to drag those down to the second page. So now these are applied to our second page, and these boxes here are applied to our first page. I'm going to go ahead and start setting up our text and type and start setting up our font hierarchy. We don't want to worry too much about the sides of the boxes just yet because we don't really know how big this text is going to be. We know we're going to change it. Obviously, we need to make our headers bigger. We probably want to make our text size a little bit bigger. So this is going to require bigger boxes. We don't want to spend a lot of time sizing our boxes and then go change our text because then we're going to have to go change the boxes again. So let's focus on text first. In order to do that, I am going to be using our paragraph panel, our character panel, paragraph styles, and character styles as well. A quick way to bring all of those up is just to go to our window, workspace, and then switch to the typography workspace. And let's go ahead and bring out some of those. So we've got paragraph styles and paragraph, character styles, and characters. So those are the main ones that we're going to be using. I'm going to go ahead and collapse that for now. And again, this is going to be a real intro course. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with gradients and texture. We're not going to get into those in this video. So character. We're going to start with the size of our characters. And for me, personally, it works best to start with my most readable text, the base kind of normal text, and then start adding decorative elements to it with headers and subheaders and titles and stuff like that to build out my font hierarchy. Font hierarchy's job is really just to organize these sections, make sure that your biggest blocks of text are nice and readable, but also to add kind of a style and a flavor to it that you can't get with just your readable text. So let's zoom in on this a little bit. So I'm holding Alt and using the mouse wheel to just kind of zoom in on this. I'm going to go ahead and go to type and hide these characters so that we can see what it's going to look like without any extra characters there. I'm also going to hide this background. So I'm going to click out of the text box real quickly so that I can use a keyboard shortcut. Of course, if you're in a text box and you start using your keyboard shortcut, you're just going to type, and that's no good. So we want to make sure that we're out of it. So I'm going to click my little selection box and click out. And if you hit W on the keyboard, that hides the grid. So it makes it a little bit easier to see what this is actually going to look like on the page without all these blue and purple lines. So there we go. We've got our text here. And I'm just going to select all. So Control A. We're going to apply it to everything, including what it will ultimately be the header. And start looking at different fonts here. Now with your font, you want to think about what the font kind of communicates, what the look is. So for instance, Matura here has a specific look. It reminds us of a specific kind of text. It has a specific flavor. Same thing with Himalaya. Same thing with these kind of scripty fonts here. Now, whenever you're considering your font for your base normal font, that's going to be the largest blocks of text, your biggest paragraphs, you want something nice and readable. Nobody wants to read an entire paragraph of Mistral. It's unnecessarily difficult to read. I mean, I'm sure you could probably struggle through it, but it's just making it kind of unappealing to look at. This kind of font is best reserved for headers, so I might make soups that font, but I wouldn't make this entire paragraph that font because I want to make sure that all the information is as readable and as easy to digest as possible. That doesn't mean that we can't select a nice font for it, but it does mean that we probably don't want to select something that's really, really kind of large or decorative. Same thing for this one. This one makes a great header, but for an entire block of text, it's all caps and it's kind of like we're shouting at the viewers. So we don't want to use Balboa for this either. So I've gone through these, and for this I'm going to use Mr. Eves. Mr. Eves is a Typekit font, and actually all the fonts that I'm going to be using for this are Typekit fonts because they integrate with the Adobe CC subscription. Of course, you can download and install your own fonts if you want to use something like from Google Fonts or DA Font or Font Squirrel or one of those other sites. But for this, I'm going to be using Typekit fonts. Advantages of Typekit and Google Fonts are that they are web hosted so that you can use them in your website later on. You won't be able to use something like from DA Font or Font Squirrel on a website, whereas with Typekit, many of these fonts, most of them, you can actually use as a web font as well, a hosted web font, which is kind of handy. So I'm going to use Mr. Eves mod OT here. I've already got it selected from earlier. This is a pretty straightforward sans serif font, meaning it doesn't have the little tails like Times New Roman has little tails on the ends of the letters. This is just kind of rounded off and it's blocked. It's a little bit more modern than a serif font, but it's still nice and easy to read. You don't have any difficulty reading this. I guess if it were actual words, then it would be even easier to read, but as is, it's just a bunch of jargon, lorem ipsum text. So we'll start off with this as our main text. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger, so we'll boost it up to 13 points. And what I want to do once I've established this as my main font is I want to create a paragraph style. This is a little bit extra effort at the beginning, but it will save you so much time later on. I've watched students repeatedly forget to do this and end up having to change each and every little block in their layout. It takes them forever, where if they had just done a couple of clicks here at the beginning, they could have easily changed the entire layout with a couple of clicks later. So we need a paragraph style for this. This is going to be our normal paragraph. By default, everything uses this basic paragraph. What we're going to do is create a new one. So this little new page here in our paragraph styles panel. Click new and it'll create paragraph style 1. You want to double click on that. That will both apply it and also open the paragraph style menu. And it's already got our character formats here. If we click on basic character formats, we can see it's 13 points and it's Mr. Eves. We've also got different weights and stuff. And we can really control our entire paragraph style from here. We've got all the controls that we need from this paragraph style menu. I'm going to go ahead and name this normal. It's going to be our normal text. Click OK. So now that is applied to this text box. And I'm going to just quickly zoom out. We're going to select everything on the page and click normal, so it's applied everywhere. Same thing down here. Drag a box around all of this. This is where it starts to save us a lot of time. Select everything and click normal. So now normal is applied to all of our text. We'll go through later and apply our headers individually, but now normal is kind of the baseline for everything. And looking at this zoomed out here, I'll notice that it's still a little bit hard to tell where one item ends and where the next begins. It does have a line break between them, but there's not a lot of space between those. The slow Microsoft Word way would be to go in here and press enter and put a line break between each and every one of these. We're not going to do that because we're going to work smarter, not harder. And this is where our paragraph styles start to come into play. You want to click off of this so we're not applying the paragraph style again. And then just double click on normal. And we're going to go into indents and spacing. So instead of having to add an extra line break manually, we can just go in here to spacing and add some space after. So I'm going to add 5 millimeters of space after. Click out of that. And I do have preview turned on by default. I don't think preview is turned on, so you'll need to turn preview on in order to see how this works. But you'll see that it's now added a little bit of space between each paragraph. No need to go in and add line breaks to every single thing. It's all applied, it's all done for us really easily. If we expand this out a little bit, we can see it's applied there too. And if I deselect this and hit W, we can see that the space between these lines is the same as the space between our columns. So this is where our proportions using that factor system comes into play, making sure that the space between our lines of text is the same as the space between our lines of columns will help make everything feel like it's more cohesive and coherent. All right, so we've applied that. Let's go ahead and look at our headers here, because our headers are still a little bit hard to see. I'm going to hit W, and let's go ahead and zoom in on soups here. So for soups, we want to make something that kind of stands out and grabs people's attention a little bit better. It's now more easy to see the different sections, but we're not kind of calling attention to the sections as best we can. And we also are missing an opportunity to add some character and some style to this. In your headers, that's where you're going to want to add your kind of decorative fonts, the things that are harder to read or that didn't work in paragraph styles like Balboa here. Looked really, really bad as a paragraph font, but as a header font, it does a really good job. It stands up, it's very loud, it's all capital letters, it calls attention without, feeling like it's yelling at us. We also have Mistral here. It's a lot easier to see. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. So let's just go ahead and try 18 or maybe 20. Let's actually take this down to like 22. This still gets the kind of character and the style that we want, again, but without it being kind of a hindrance to being able to read our text. One thing to watch out for anytime you're using a kind of scripty handwritten font like this is a real hallmark of amateur graphic design, is to make all of this in capital letters. This particular one isn't as bad. Some of them are much worse. Most of these are designed to flow so that one letter connects to the next. When you make them all capital, they don't connect to the next. So like the U is just totally unrelated to the P, which is totally unrelated to the S. And it kind of breaks the way that we, the reason for writing in cursive is to speed things up by connecting one letter to the next. So it just looks a little bit strange. Nobody writes cursive all capital letters. It's just kind of a strange way to do this. So again, this is a hallmark of amateur graphic design, is that you'll have a scripty font with all capital letters. Don't do that. Just keep everything lowercase, if I can actually spell here, and use proper sentence or title casing so that you have capital letter at the beginning, proper nouns and names, or the title of a section in this case, and it will call attention, but it also flow together. So we see that the O connects to the U, connects to the P, connects to the S. The font has been designed that way. Another amateur hallmark is to add too much space between them. So here we have our character controls. We've got our tracking, our kerning, we've got the kind of character size and stuff like that. You'll see fonts that have been really heavily modified with these, and for the most part, you want to leave these alone. Like, you don't want to use this. Use an actual proper cursive instead of just tilting your characters. Again, the font has been designed specifically by a font designer to look good at a certain aspect ratio, and once we start messing with that, it starts looking really, really strange. Same thing with the width of the characters. You can start scaling that up, and it's going to start to look stretched out and a little bit weird here. So we're going to keep that set to 100%. Same thing with stretching it vertically. We set that to like 200%. It starts to look a little bit weird. So this is something that stands out, and you can tell that font was not designed for that size in mind. If you want a taller font, look for something that's like a condensed font. We're going to go ahead and move to tracking here. So tracking can sometimes be really handy, but again, you want to keep your font in mind. If you have the scripty font and you add a lot of space between them, that kind of breaks up the letters here so that they no longer connect, and it looks a little bit goofy. So again, if you're doing a scripty font, you're trying to make your viewer imagine that font was actually handwritten by somebody. If you add a lot of space to it, then we're trying to imagine the person that would do a scripty font, like write in cursive, but also space all of their letters like that, and it's just not going to happen. So You want to be careful with how much space that you add between these. So this is our, sorry, actually, is that our tracking there? That's our tracking. This is our kerning. The difference between tracking and kerning is that tracking is the space between all of your characters. Kerning is just going to be the space between individual characters. So if I wanted to add space between the S and the O, for instance, I could increase the kerning and it's going to push those further apart. By default, kerning is set at metrics. So it's going to keep it kind of based on the font size. You can also set it to optical, which slightly changes it there. I'm going to go ahead and set it back to metrics. All right, so let's choose our font for this one. I think I was going to use one called Coquette. Coquette is nice because it's kind of a blend of cursive. It's got these kind of rounded characters, but it's also a little bit decorative. So it looks nice. It's still readable. I'm going to give it a little bit more weight. So let's try light instead of thin. And let's go ahead and take the tracking down on this. So this is one case where there's actually quite a bit of space between them. You can decrease the tracking here. Of course, we don't want to jumble all the letters up so that they're touching, but now we can just kind of place them like that so they're a little bit closer together and we don't have quite so much space between them. So we've set up our headers. Let's actually look and see what this looks like with a bold. That's a little bit heavy. So let's go back to regular. Actually, regular kind of stands out just enough to call attention. I'm going to go ahead and decrease or increase the tracking just a little bit here. Sometimes you'll see things that are a little bit strange where if we look at the O and the U, they look like they're further apart. That's where our kerning comes in, so we can decrease the kerning and pull just those characters together. This is something that you would want to do individually though per header. So this is something like a detail that we would get to much later. So for now we're just going to leave this at metrics. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new paragraph style for that. So click new, double click on that paragraph style, we'll call this header. And I'm going to call it header 1. And so this is based on the normal paragraph style. If we changed something in the normal paragraph style that was not customized for the header, so for instance the line, or the indents and spacing, the space after, that would actually change for this one as well. However, if we changed the font of our general, that would not flow through because this one has its own customized font. So we'll leave it based on normal. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to apply that header 1 to the rest of the stuff. So we've got our title up here. We'll go ahead and apply header 1 to that. We'll apply header 1 to salad. And I'm just double clicking on these names. Oops, I double clicked on that one too. And let's come down over here. So double click there, header 1, and double click on entrees. So even just that little bit, having to do those manually takes quite a bit longer than it did before, where we would just like select a whole bunch of boxes and apply a paragraph style. All right, so there's our text boxes, and we'll get into the titles and stuff once we know how much room we have. Again, our text comes first. So before we do anything else, we want to make sure that we've allocated enough space for our text and that we've set up our text appropriately, and then we're going to fill in the rest of the space with images and goodies and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and start positioning these. I want, for this, I'm going to do kind of an offset thing where we might start with soups on the left. We'll make soups a 4-column wide box. And then salad, also 4 columns wide, but we're going to set it to the right. Now salad obviously there's more stuff in there than what we've got room for, so we'll need to make our box a little bit bigger. And one thing that I find it's handy is thinking about where your extra space is going to be, where you're going to dedicate your kind of leftover space. In this case, I want to leave my extra space allocated here at the top. Whereas on the second page, I'm going to have a footer, and I'm going to leave the extra space allocated towards the bottom. Now, as it is, all of my text is positioned at the top of a text box, and so as I go through these, I might need to kind of move this around and then move this one down. And just as I'm fiddling with this, it can be a little bit more difficult to see where things are aligned And I keep having to resize the text box to just the text here and then bring it down and say, well, maybe I want to bring this up a little bit here, make it a little bit wider. I started messing around with the design, and then all of a sudden now I have to keep reorganizing the size of this text box. So just to make sure that I allocate all of my extra space to the top, in this case, it would actually help to set all of our text to the bottom of the text box instead of being at the top, so that I can just move this around. Like down here, I can change the size of this without changing the position of my text. I kind of want to invert that so that I'm leaving my extra space up here. So I'm going to select both of these. And up here at the top, we've got our control bar. You should have some buttons, and this may not show up on your screen. You may need to expand out your control bar if you don't see this, or you may need to go into properties. But you should see these little align, center align, bottom, etc. I'm going to set this to align bottom. And now my text aligns to the bottom of my text box. Now this one is not aligning to the bottom of the text box. And the reason, if we open type and go to show hidden characters, is that we might have some extra stuff down here. So we've got this little extra character down here, so we just want to delete that and clear it out so it goes all the way down to the bottom. So if you're kind of messing around with your boxes and it's taking you a while to figure out where they should go, just identifying where your extra space should be, where your leftover space should be, in this case it's going to be at the top and be dedicated to our header, will help you kind of figure out whether you want to set your text to the bottom or to the top. By setting it to the bottom like this, now I can change the top of this quickly without changing the layout of my text. And this is handy because now I can set this to snap to different parts. So I can say, well, I want it to be right at the top of this, and then oops, let's set this so it aligns to that. Well, that feels a little bit squished there. So now let's push it up a little bit. And now we can stick this right in here. Now, how do we decide where to put that? That's where our factors come in. And I know this is a little bit hacky, I guess, but what I like to do is create a space placeholder. So I'm just going to hold shift, make sure that it stays perfectly square, and make it exactly the same size as the gutter here. Let's hold spacebar and pan up to that and zoom in on it. So it's exactly the same size as the gutter, which means it's a 5mm square. And I'm going to grab that square and I'm just going to put it right at the top of the character here, at the top of the tallest character. And then I can set my box to snap to that, and then I can set this box to snap to both of those. So now we've left just a little bit of space between. I'm going to hit W to hide all the grids and stuff like that. So we've left just this little bit of space. It's just a little bit more breathable and a little bit easier on the eye there. Now we could also make that a little bit bigger if we wanted, but I think that's probably fine. So we've left just a little bit of breathing room. So we've left that white space, negative space, and given the eye a place to rest. I'm going to hit W again. Just going to make this 4 columns again. So these are both 4 columns wide. And our images will go here and over here. Now I can go ahead and draw placeholders for those images, but we're not 100% what the size is going to be yet. And I like to see where I've got this little placeholder here. I can drag this up so it snaps now to the size of that little placeholder that I put in earlier. So now we've got this nice little space between the bottom of this text here and the side of this that is exactly the same as our gutter. This is one of those things, it just makes everything nice and neat and ordered and clean and really, really satisfying to look at when you're done. I'm going to also have a placeholder over here, so I'm going to hold Option. So just like Illustrator and Photoshop, if you hold the Alt key in Windows or Option on a Mac, you can click and drag something and it will make a copy of that, which is kind of handy. Same thing for this guy. I'm going to hold Alt, since I'm on Windows, it's Alt. Let's drag that up here. Zoom in, yep, all right, there he is. So we can bring this down, and we can set this, to be exactly the same height as our box right here. So our boxes all kind of line up in this nice grid. Everything is nice and orderly, and then we've got all this space up here at the top for our header. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag this up here, and then we can fill up the entire header with that. And then with this one here, we might want to center our text, or center it right in the middle rather than at the bottom. We can center it vertically like that. And if we double click on this and grab all of our text, we've got two different menu layouts here at the top. We've got our character, and we also have our paragraph. If we go to paragraph, we have the align center, so we can center that text there. Typically, I don't recommend aligning stuff to center. This is something that I see a lot. Again, in amateur graphic design, people will align everything center. The problem with doing that is that when you're reading, and we read left to right in English, we have to jump back to the left side of our line. So I read this line all the way across, and I need to jump back over here to this line, read all the way across, and then jump back over here to this line. If you left justify things, all of those lines start in pretty much the same place vertically or horizontally. We don't have to look for it in some random place. When we center align things, you just make it more difficult to find the beginning of each line so that you're not jumping back to the same place every time. If we select all this text and we center it, now when I read across this line, get to the end, and then jump back to the next line, it's no longer here, it's over here. I read across this, well, it's not in the same vertical location or same horizontal location, it's here a little bit. So it just makes it that much more difficult to see where stuff should be. It makes it a little bit more difficult to read. And again, you always want to prioritize readability and the functionality of the design over the aesthetics. So sometimes having it centered looks nicer, but you really have to weigh that against readability. So when you can, always try to left justify things because it just makes it that much easier to read, especially for something like this where we're not trying to do some really conceptual thing with our design. It's just a restaurant menu. We're trying to make sure that people can read what the entrees are, and we're trying to make it look nice. So that's all we're trying to do here. Of course, obviously, if you're trying to do something conceptual or something interesting with your text, then those rules you want to break specifically and with intent. But in this case, we're just breaking them, or we're just going to follow those rules. In this case, for the header, it's not like we're reading across and then jumping to another line that's really long and hard to read. We have only 3 lines here, and they're pretty well defined, so it's not like we're going to have a lot of confusion or a lot of other text getting in the way of that. So we can go ahead and center that stuff. Now, before we start really finalizing our grid here, we do want to finalize our text, and there's still some things that we need to do with our text. One of those being is that we need to kind of place our prices. I think where the prices are now is probably fine. Sometimes though it's nice to be able to shop by price, and if that's the case, if you want to do that, you can set all the prices to be in a single column. So I can just jump from price to price to price to price to price and figure out what's the cheapest, what I want to buy, and get that. So that's how I typically go to restaurants, so I find it kind of handy when all the prices are easy to see. So in order to do that, there's a little trick that we need to use with tabs. Now, of course, you could say, well, I'm going to try to right justify that, but if I select that and then right justify, it right justifies the entire paragraph. So that's not what we want to do. We want to right justify just this part. In order to do that, we're going to need to hit tab. So, and actually, let's go ahead and delete our space. We don't need the space. And I do have the hidden characters turned on so that we can see them. And then tab is this little double arrow thing right here. The nice thing about tabs are that they're flexible spaces. You can change and make them larger or smaller as needed. So I've got my tab here. What I'm going to do is just select all of this text. And we're going to go up to our type and go to the tabs section. And we can use a tab to push this price all the way over to the right side of the box. So what we're going to do is click on this right justified tab. And then anywhere along this gray bar, not here in the ruler, but on this gray bar here, we can click and it will create, that's where it's going to push that tab to. So it's going to put a right justified tab. I'm just going to drag this all the way over to the white arrow on the right, and that's going to push that tab all the way over to the right side of our box. So quick and easy. Now if I just will delete the space there and hit tab, and it's going to tab all of these. Since I applied this to the entire text box, or I selected all the text and applied it, it's going to push all of our text over to that side. Now, of course, if I wanted to add a leader, and I'm not going to do this because I want to keep this a little bit cleaner, but if I wanted to add something like dots, for instance, you select that little arrow, and then we'll put in period right there, and it will add periods between them. Now, again, I'm not going to do that for this because I want to keep it nice and clean. I just want to put the prices on the same place everywhere. You'll notice that it's added that to our style. I'm going to go ahead and right-click this, and we're going to redefine style. So if you right-click a style and redefine, let's go ahead and select this first. So right-click and select this entire thing, right-click, normal, and say redefine style. It's going to add that style to, or add that to everything else that has that style applied. So all this stuff down here should also have that applied as well. Now, it's worth noting that this is working incredibly well for mine because all of my boxes are the same width. Since I'm doing this 4-column layout and all of my text boxes are 4 columns wide, I can quickly and easily do this, and everything just fits the way it's supposed to because all the text boxes are the same. If this text box were a little bit narrower or a little bit wider, it wouldn't work the same way again. So if I made it a little bit narrower, see, it'll break to a new line here. That's not what we want. So because they are all 4 columns wide, this works very quickly by just replacing that space with a tab. Same thing down here. Now this is really, really wide. This is much too wide, and see, it's moved them over, but it hasn't moved them over yet because we haven't added our tabs. So we delete that and tab it over. It's not going to add much more than just a regular tab space because the width of the box has already exceeded what we would want for the tabs. So it just kind of puts in a normal tab space. This one we would go ahead and decrease the width of that, so it's now 4 columns again. There's our 4-column layout right there. And now our price for that one is fine. Let's go ahead and zoom in here using the mouse wheel and Alt to kind of move around, deleting these spaces and tabbing them over. Of course, you could do find replace, but then it would find replace all of the spaces in here. So this is one of those unfortunate times where we have to do this manually. I'm also looking at this, realizing my entrees should actually be above the desserts. So we'll kind of go for the same layout that we had on the other page. We'll put entrees up here at the top. We'll make it 4 columns. Desserts down here below entrees, also 4 columns. Let's go ahead and make our entrees a little bit bigger. We've got a lot of overset text on both of these. Let's go ahead and expand this out considerably. I'm going to delete. Doesn't look like there's any extra stuff there. So let's go ahead and move this down a little bit and move this. Again, I want to make sure that these are 4 columns. And it looks like at 4 columns, it's not going to leave us enough room for this. We're going to end up with something like this where our desserts are right at the bottom. We don't have any room for a footer. I do want to have some room for a footer here. And in this case, with the layout that I've chosen, I won't have room for the footer. Now, there are a couple of different things we could do with that. We could kind of change our pattern here, and we could just forego having an image for desserts and make that the full width. We could make our font a little bit smaller, which would need to affect the entire page or the entire document. You never want to have fonts that are smaller in one page or one specific section than others. You want to keep it consistent all the way through. So we don't really want to do that because it's already pretty small as is. So one other thing that we can do is to edit our copy. Now, this is more common than you would think in graphic design, but going back to look at the text and review the text to say, you know, does it need to be this long? Can we communicate the same thing without this really, really long text? And oftentimes, rewording things to make them more succinct can make them more appealing and can make your whole design work better. And in this case, desserts probably don't need these really, really long descriptions anyway. So we're going to pretend that this is something that I've gone through with my copy editor, or if I'm the copy editor, I've gone through and revised myself and just say, well, I can do without that line. I definitely don't need 4 lines for a dessert description here, so we're going to go ahead and delete that stuff. Since I'm working with this lorem ipsum text, it's pretty easy to just go through and pick things and say, well, I'm going to get rid of that. But sometimes you do need to go through and identify things and say, you know what, this just has to go. There's no reason to have this really long-winded description of each one of these desserts. We can really make that a lot shorter, make it more concise, and that will do 2 things. It'll make it easier to digest the information, and it will also give us that room that we need for the footer. You want to prioritize these 2, so between the 2 entrees and desserts, entrees probably need more description than desserts do. So we'll make sure that we leave entrees till next. So if we still need more space, then we'll go ahead and look at entrees. But as is, we'll go ahead and just do desserts. I'm going to go ahead and delete these and fix these tabs. We'll delete the spaces, and I'm just deleting a space and adding a tab. So now these all stick to the right side. All right, so now we can go ahead and start looking at really tweaking the text. There are a couple of issues here where we have widows and orphans. Widows and orphans are where just one word or 1 or 2 words breaks to another line. And in general, you want to avoid doing that because it looks a little bit clunky to have this extra word just taking up an entire line when we could probably just reword this more efficiently to make it fit a little bit better. So in this case, I'm just going to take out some of this. I'll say that, you know, we don't need that extra description up there. We'll make it a little bit more concise and take this down so it's only 2 lines instead of 3. Of course, again, we run into the same conundrum. Should we make the text smaller? Should we make the box larger or smaller? Should we move this stuff around? And really, any of the things that you do to the sides of the text or the size of the text box, it just runs the issue of moving the problem around. So we have widows and orphans here, and if we move it out a little bit, then, you know, now we've actually exacerbated the problem and added a widow and orphan here where we didn't have one before. So really the best way is to just go through your text and revise it to make sure that it's a little bit more concise. So we'll say, all right, well, we can do without these extra 2 words here. Now we've got 2 lines. Now this one here, we can go ahead and remove these 2 words. So now we've got this is a little bit more concise. Same thing here, we don't need maybe those 2 words right there. We can delete those and just make that a little bit more concise. So always looking at your text, try to avoid widows and orphans, and instead of changing the text size to get rid of your widows and orphans, just change the text itself. Reword your text, make it a little bit more concise, a little bit more streamlined, and that's going to have, you're going to fix multiple things where you know, doing it by just changing the box size might actually add problems somewhere else. So in this case, let's go ahead and get rid of these. In some cases too, you might want to actually add text to it, make it a little bit longer. So here, I'm just trying to get rid of those so that we don't have these breaking to new lines. Another thing that you want to be aware of is hyphenation. Right here it's hyphenating too, and we should have probably done this a little bit earlier, but select your paragraph. By default, it hyphenates, and honestly, I wish that weren't the case. You almost never want it to hyphenate. Just let it break the word completely to the next line. But hyphenation takes a word, puts a little dash in the middle of it, and then breaks half of the word to the next line. Ideally, you never want to do that. So we're just going to uncheck hyphenate here. And we're going to go back to paragraph styles and see it's got the little plus sign next to it, which means that this one is changed, but the rest are not. So we're going to right click and we're going to redefine style so that now all of them have that same thing applied where they're not going to hyphenate words. And we'll go back through. I should have done this before I did all my revising of widows and orphans. Right. Okay, so once we're happy with the text, we can start tweaking things and see here I've actually kind of moved this down a little bit further. So now we need to move our little block down a little bit further until it just touches the top of the S right there. So move it down just a little bit. There we go. So now we can align everything else based on that. So we'll take my text box here, snap that to there, snap this text box to there. And actually, I guess, you know what, it makes sense to go ahead and have two of these. So we'll have two spaces. Let's go ahead and move this one down and this one down. And InDesign is great at snapping all this stuff together and keeping our space proportional for us. So we'll go ahead and move all of this stuff down here. So before I did this as just one space, I'm going to go ahead and check. Here I did it as two spaces, and I actually like it a little bit better with two blocks of space here. So we essentially have a 10 millimeter block right here instead of a 5 millimeter block, and I kind of like that better. Since we have the extra space on this page, we'll go ahead and leave it with 10, but I'm going to be consistent, so I'm going to leave 10 millimeters of space on top of this one as well. So let's go ahead and hit W again so we can see our text boxes. We'll snap this here, and we will snap this one here so it goes ahead and takes up, actually I'm sorry, let's snap it right there, so it takes up this entire space. Now we've got a nice big space for our header here. Alright, so the header's got a nice big chunk of space. We got a lot of space for the salad image, soup image, a little bit smaller, but that's okay. And our images are really just to add decoration to the menu. So let's go ahead and size this stuff as well. So now that we've done the first page, let's go ahead and do this second page. We'll bring this up here, and I'm gonna, just like I did before, actually let's just duplicate one of these. So I'm gonna drag one of these down. And see here, we've got it, it's set to 5 millimeters. We could also just set it to 10 millimeters, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave it as is. We'll add this space. Now I wanna make sure that this box kind of fits to our text here. If you make it too small, then that line disappears when you have overset text. We wanna make sure that it's just right at the baseline of that text if we can. It's right about there. Go ahead and put our text box, or our little box here, duplicate that. So now we've got 10 millimeters. I'm going to bring this up, so now it aligns there. And let's go ahead and duplicate one of these. Just drag it over. Make it our 2-column width, and then we'll snap it to the top here. And then we'll duplicate this one, drag it out like that, and drag it down to the bottom of this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move this up so it's right at the bottom of our text here. Let's make sure that this image snaps to that, so it's exactly the same size as our text block here. I'm going to take these two little spacers, keep hitting the Windows key because I'm used to hitting the Command key on a Mac. And we'll drag them down. And I forget, I think I had... this one here is a little bit different. We've got more space between our text and the bottom of our image here because of the nature of this this header. In this case, because of this text is right on that line and we have a big thick block of text there, I'm actually going to go ahead and leave 2 little spacers between there so that we don't end up having an image that's really, really close to it. I'm going to go ahead and drag this down. We'll see what it looks like, and then if we need to make it bigger, we can tweak stuff once we have our images in. We're going to go ahead and put our placeholders. Oops, and actually, I'm using a placeholder here. We should just be using our text box here. So this one will set that, there, and we will grab all of our text inside. So Control A is a quicker way to get it, and we'll just align center horizontally. And if I select this text box here, we'll make sure that it's aligned vertical center as well. All right, so let's see here. It's looking pretty good. I think we can go ahead and start bringing our images in. So I'm going to start up here. We'll leave the header image for last, but I'm going to go ahead and add our soup image in. To import images, we need to place them. Now, before I start doing that, I want to save this. And I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Save As. And I want to save it somewhere with the images, that's close to the images. I've created a folder here for this demo. And in that folder, I've created a folder with the images. You want to keep everything together. If you have all of your images in your downloads folder, and you have your InDesign file somewhere else, and then you take your InDesign file somewhere, but forget to bring all the images with you, all your links are going to break, and you're going to have to download those images again and relink everything, and it's just a waste of time. So instead of doing that, just keep everything together. Put it all in one folder. Keep it organized. It's not like Photoshop where you can import an image and it becomes embedded or becomes part of that file. Your InDesign file and all of the other files, your fonts and your images, they're all separate. They don't exist in the same thing. It just links them rather than embedding them. And so if you move them to different places on your hard drive or you move them to different computers, you're going to break those links. And actually, most applications work that way. Only a few, like Photoshop and Word, PowerPoint and stuff like that, will actually embed them within the file. The majority of applications throughout digital media and digital arts all work on this linking system. So we're going to go ahead and name this. We should quit selecting our... Oh, there we go. All right, so we'll save it. And again, make sure that it's in the folder with everything else. So now we've got our demo file and we've got our images right here next to it. And if I want to move all these somewhere else, I can take all this stuff real quickly. I can just select it all and move it somewhere else. I want to make sure all that stuff stays together and that it's in one handy folder that I can move around. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and start placing our images. Everything's nice and organized. I'm going to go to File, and I can go to Place, or you can just hit Control D. I'm going to be using the hotkey, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this placeholder that we made. I'm going to hit Control D, and I'm going to find the picture of our salads here. Click Open, and let's actually switch to our Essentials workspace. I'm going to go back to Window, Workspace, Essentials. That'll bring up our Properties panel here, which the Properties panel is pretty handy for placement. So with images, when we place our image here, you'll notice it's really, really pixelated. First and foremost, if it's really, really pixelated and you want to see what it looks like clear, you can go to View and go to Display Performance and make sure it's set to high quality display, and that should clean things up for you. By default, it shows you a kind of a low-res pixelated version of an image. If everything looks pixelated, just check in high quality display first. Now, this is probably going to slow your computer down considerably, especially if you don't have a discrete graphics card. So you might want to turn it back off if everything kind of slows down. Now our image is placed inside of this box and is placed at its original full size. If I click on the image and then click this little circle here, we should be able to see, let's click on this here, we should be able to see the actual size of the image. I guess the image is just too large and we're not actually seeing the box for it, which probably looks like the case because we were zoomed way in on this. So it's placed it in at size at 72 pixels per inch resolution. I'm going to bring up our info panel. So we're going to go to Window, Info. We can see its effective PPI is 72 and its actual PPI is 72. You want to make sure that your effective PPI stays at or above about 300. Sometimes you can get away with 150, but for the most part you want to try to keep it above 300. And so it's brought this image in so that the effective PPI and the actual PPI match. And what's that's resulted in is this huge, huge, huge image. We actually can't see hardly any of it. We're just seeing this one tiny part of it. So we're going to select this box, and there's a few different ways that we can arrange the stuff in here. We have frame fitting. We can fill the frame proportionally. So it's going to make this image much, much smaller. And it's going to fill the frame proportionally, which in this case has worked pretty well, but it hasn't done anything regards to based on the content. It's just filled the frame, and then the extra here is spilling over to the side. If I click this circle and drag this around, we can actually drag the image around inside the frame. And if I click out of here and just click the frame, I can actually make the frame larger and reveal more of the image or less of the image. Now, of course, the frame should stay fixed because the frame is based on the size of our text blocks and everything, so we shouldn't be enlarging or resizing the frame at this point. Just be aware that if you grab these little handles, you're not actually going to resize your image, you're going to resize the frame. That's something that I see a lot of times with people coming into InDesign. They're unfamiliar with how the frame system works and that you're kind of placing images into these set boxes. And so they'll grab this and they'll start messing around with this and trying to resize their image. And that's not really how that works. If you want to resize the image, and this is, I wouldn't suggest doing it this way because you really should be setting your boxes first and then sizing the image to the box. You can grab this handle holding Control and then size it, and it will size the box and the image down together. Again, I wouldn't recommend doing that because ideally you'll have your boxes set and then the image is just fitting to whatever space you've allocated for it. So I'm going to select this. Let's look at some of the other options for frame fitting. We also have fit content proportionally, so we're going to see the entire image and it's just going to fit within this box, but that leaves us these blank spaces above and below. That's not ideal. We can fit the content to the frame, which is just going to stretch it, which obviously we definitely don't want that. We can fit the frame to the content, which that means it's going to resize the frame here, and we don't want that because we want to keep our frame the size that we've dictated for it. We just center content, which that's more or less fine. It's kind of the same as the others. And then we have content aware fit. Now this is going to be hard to see with it like this, so I'm going to go ahead and just click the little circle here. I'm going to hold shift and scale up this image proportionally so it's kind of like the weird layout that we had before. If I select this and I hit content aware fit, this is a new option in the newest Adobe CC 2018, I think. This is really handy because it actually looks at the content of the image and it tries to assume what the focal point is going to be, what the area of interest and highest contrast and stuff is going to be, and it tries to center that in your image frame. And that actually works pretty well for the most part. So for the most part, we're going to be using that content aware fit because it's a quick kind of one-click thing and it should look good. So I'm going to go ahead and select our next box here and keeping the info window available. Before we move on, actually, let's check our effective PPI now. It's 1,725. It's way more than we actually need, so we should be good to go. It's way above 300, so we should be good to go there. If, for whatever reason, when you place it in there, it's still below 300, that means that you'll probably need to find a different image. That the image that you've selected is just too small for the space. When it prints out, it's going to print out all pixelated and ugly, so you'll need to change to a different image. So let's hit this one, Control D. This is for our soup, so I'm going to go ahead and place my soup. I've actually mixed these up. This should be soups, and that one should be salads. So let's go ahead and replace these. I'm going to hit Control D, and we're going to Set that one to soups, and then this one we'll hit Control D, and we'll select that one to be salads. Now, this is placed in kind of a weird way. This one's also placed in kind of a weird way. Let's go ahead and do content aware fit and see what it does. It's okay, not the best, but it's all right. See what content aware does with this one. Also kind of okay. So content aware tried. It's still a machine, so it doesn't kind of get the best crop. I do want to see some of the avocados here, not just tomatoes. I guess for whatever reason it decided that people like red, so the AI algorithm decided that we want to see more tomatoes than avocados. In this case, it cropped off our soup, so we'll just bring this down a little bit because we want to make sure that we see the soup, and the rest of it is kind of decoration. So we'll bring that down like that, just by clicking this little circle and holding shift and dragging straight down. All right, so let's go ahead and do the others. So on our entrees, I'm going to hit Control D. And one of the entrees is going to be this steak right here, so we'll open that. And desserts, I'll hit Control D, and I've got a picture of cake right here, so we'll open that one. And again, with both of these, I'm going to select them and then do the content aware fit. Let's see what it gets us for those. We'll do 2 at a time there, so we can quickly get 2 images instead of just the one. And it's done a pretty good job with the cake. This steak, though, is not ideal, so let's move this over a little bit. So just holding shift, we can drag it over so we get more of the steak itself and less of the side there. Just kind of create compositionally within that rectangle that you've got, try to create an interesting composition. And then at the top, we've got our header here. So in the header, I'm going to select this box, and even in a text box, we can actually place an image in there. So I'm going to hit Control D, and we're going to place this pasta image behind it. And that's actually going to place it within the text box. Now, let's go ahead and do our content aware. It's hidden our text, unfortunately, and it's replaced what was a text box with the image. So we have to do this in a little bit different way. You could add a background to this, but what I prefer to do is actually just add a box behind it. It's a little bit more flexible. So I'm actually going to delete this because it's going to be a pain to resize that. I'm just going to move this off to the side here, and I'm going to go ahead and make a placeholder just like we had before, about that size. Select Control D, or hit Control D, and we'll add our pasta image here. And then we'll hit content aware fill. And let's go ahead and place the image in here. Now we're going to have to place the image, make sure that we leave room for the text. Unfortunately, I can't place it any more to the right, although with our effective PPI of 846, I can actually scale this up quite a bit and make a little bit more room for the text here. So we're just going to try to make a nice composition here. I'm going to go ahead and place the text over top. Now the text is sitting behind it, and the reason is that it's actually on a layer below. InDesign has layers just like Illustrator and Photoshop. However, there's not as much focus on the layer system here as it is on like the pages and other things. But you can affect them, so we're going to go to Window, and we're going to open up Layers. You'll see right now everything is on just a single layer, and we see all of our stuff. Everything that we've added is just gone onto one layer in different levels. I'm just going to move this one up to the top so it's in front of this text here. Now, I'm also going to change the placement, or change the placement of the image here. So we can lock this. If we don't want to affect that text there, we can lock it. Now we can just grab the image only, and I'll move this image. I kind of want to move it down a little bit, just so it kind of frames the text there and leaves a nice dark area for the text to exist. So now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the text layer, and we can double click and we can change the color of our text here. So we've got the text selected. I'm going to go up to character, here because that's where we change our color. So in the character menu, we can change color. And we do that with our character fill. So I'm going to give this character fill paper, which is white. So we assume that it's being printed on white paper. So I give it the color of paper. And then I'm also going to give this just a tiny little hint of a drop shadow. So to add a drop shadow, we need to bring up the effects panel. So I'm going to make sure that this one here is selected. This text box is selected. And I'm going to go to Window and go to Effects. And right here we've got different blend modes that we can use, just like Photoshop. And we've got different things that we can control in terms of the blend modes for specific items within that box. And what we're looking for, though, is to add an effect. So we can click on this effect, and we've got a bunch of different options here. In this case, we've got drop shadow. Now, drop shadow is one of those effects. I'm going to go ahead and turn preview on so we can see what it's doing. But drop shadow is one of those effects that you want to use with caution. It's going to create this very kind of obvious, like, drop shadowy, or like, I don't know, kind of hokey effect. In this case, I'm not really using it for the drop shadow kind of three-dimensionality. I just want to darken the area around the text to make the text more readable. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and take this and set it to 0. I want the offset set to 0. I want X offset also set to 0, and I want the distance set to 0. So the drop shadow is actually just going to be directly underneath our text here. I'm going to increase the size a little bit, and you can see it's creating this just a little faint kind of darkness there. We can increase the spread slightly so that it spreads out just a little bit more around it and kind of rounds out the area behind our text with a slightly darker color. This is a nice effect because it does make our text much more readable, but it does it in a more subtle way. So we can go ahead and place our text over top of an image without having to worry as much about the readability of the text. Now, placing text over an image anytime is always a recipe for disaster because you can end up making your text completely illegible and very, very difficult to read. So you have to be careful to make sure that if you place your text over a dark background, that the text is white, so it contrasts with that, and that you don't place your text over part of an image that's light and dark, because then no matter what you set it to, black or white, part of it is going to be hard to read. So I've got this just over the dark part of the background, and I've moved these lighter parts of the picture down. But just to make sure that it's nice and readable, I'm going to go ahead and also add this drop shadow here. And we're going to increase the opacity of it a little bit, make it a little bit darker. We're going to increase the size so it spreads out and gives us this nice kind of faded out, this kind of darkened area. And I'm also going to change the color. So right now it's black. I can go into my CMYK colors here and select like a blue, for instance. Since it's set to multiply, it's still going to darken that area behind it, but it's also going to be kind of colorful now, so it's going to kind of match the colors of the image behind it. You can set it to screen, and obviously that's going to make it glow instead of a shadow. And you can change these however you want. If you want darken, if you want it to be lighten, you can play around with these blend modes and kind of do different things. In this case, since I'm putting it over a dark background, it makes more sense to put it on like multiply or darken or something like that, so that that area of the image behind it becomes darker. You can also do color dodge, sorry, color burn rather. I might make that area darker. It's just a really subtle way to kind of darken the image behind it without doing a lot of editing to the image. We don't have to take the image into Photoshop and like add a little gradient over it or anything like that. We can do it here just using drop shadow. So I'm going to click OK. And let's go ahead and turn this off. I'm hitting tab so we can see it full screen. Let's hit W to get rid of the grids. And I'm going to hit tab again so we can see it full screen. Let's go ahead and close tab since we don't need that anymore. We can kind of preview our menu layout here. And down here at the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and leave these without an image. We'll just leave it kind of blank at the bottom of that one. And once we're happy with our layout, we can go ahead and export this. Now, before we export, or before we package rather, we want to go ahead and set up our PDF export options. So PDF is the portable document format, and that's really how you're going to be submitting, sending anything to clients. It should be through PDFs, because they do include all of your fonts and your images and your text and all that stuff, and it's still in a fairly flexible, editable format. So I'm going to go to File, we're going to go to Export, and we're going to go ahead and just save it out right here. This is going to be a print PDF since we're printing our menu. So we're going to make sure that that's set to Adobe Print. And I'm going to click Save. Now, we'll go through these settings. I'm not going to change anything here, but we'll talk about some of the settings, what they do. You can, of course, if you want, just export certain pages to the PDF instead of all of them. You can embed page thumbnails, which actually is kind of handy for quickly viewing things. So embedding page thumbnails makes it a little bit bigger, but also makes it a little bit easier to read. We're going to export all the visible and printable layers. Compression, this is the images that are included in your menu. The images that we have, and if you remember, some of these images were really, really high resolution, so they had an effective PPI over 1,000. In order to keep from exporting a really huge document, what it's going to do is actually crop the images to just the box that you selected, and it's going to set the image, resample it so that that box, that cropped image, is 300 PPI. So it's our bicubic downsampling to 300 PPI. And that's only going to work for any images that are above 450. So most of our images are over 1,000, so that's going to apply to all of our images. But basically it's going to crop them, and it's also going to make them, it's going to downsample them. It's going to crop all of the images, so we're not going to export something where it has this original, huge image with a bunch of stuff that we're not seeing, the stuff that's cropped out outside of that box. But it's only going to downsample the ones that are over 450 effective PPI. For grayscale images, we can change it. So grayscale images are usually a little bit smaller in terms of size, so we can turn it off for grayscale images if we want. And then for monochrome images, it's also different. But for the vast majority of things you're going to be dealing with is going to be color images. So that's where our effective PPI is 300. If you wanted to do a really low quality print, you could set this down to 150, or if you wanted to send out just a sample resolution document to a client, something that they're not going to be able to print at full size, you could set it down to 72, so it'll just give them an idea of what it looks like without giving them something that they can run off and use without paying you. Marks and bleeds. Most printers cannot print all the way to the edge of a page, so if you wanted to print this at A4 and, for instance, you wanted this image at the top here to go all the way to the edges, you'd actually need to print it off on a larger piece of paper and then crop it down. So you might want to include crop marks, for instance, so that when it prints out, it actually prints out on this larger page with crop marks, and then you can go and cut it down to size. It's very wasteful, but that's what we have to do since no printers actually print all the way to the edge of the page. You can also add your bleed marks and your registration marks, but for this kind of thing, and for basics, we're not worried about that. We're not worried about output too much either, but you can include a color profile as well. And for advanced, we should be including our fonts. You want to make sure that your fonts are included for these files when you send it to the printer, because they probably don't have the same fonts that you've got, so you want to make sure that's included in your PDF. Security, this is really handy too for proofs and things like that, where you're sending a proof to a client, making sure that your client can't just take your work that's 90% complete and run off with it without paying, which actually has happened an absurd number of times. You would think that clients would be fair and pay you, but because freelancers are often very easy to take advantage of legally and don't have the money for attorneys and don't have the money to represent themselves in court, it's very easy for clients to take advantage of you. So you always want to be protecting yourself and making sure that they can't just run off with assets that you've provided them. So a way to do that is to restrict the PDF proof that you send them with a password. You can add a password so that they need a password just to open the document if it's got sensitive information in it, like medical information. But then for controls and permissions, you can actually go ahead and turn this on and just see some of the options here. You can restrict them to only allow printing at low resolution, so they can only print it under 150 dpi, or so that they can't print it at all. You can also restrict changes so that they can't do anything to change it. Maybe you want them to be able to comment and fill in forms and stuff and send it back to you, but otherwise you don't want them to be able to do anything with it. These are for like government forms and stuff. You've probably dealt with PDFs that required or had a password that wouldn't let you do anything other than just comment and fill in the form fields and sign it and send it back. So you can restrict them from doing anything with it, which can be really, really handy, and especially for graphic designers, this is something that you want to do to make sure that clients aren't running off with your finished or almost finished work and then not paying you. And then you can also add a summary here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. You can add a little summary, or the summary will just going to go over the different settings that you've set up. Again, I haven't changed anything. We're just going to click export. As long as there are no errors, you should be fine. The most common error that I see is one that'll pop up as say you're missing links. And what that means is that you've moved your document in your operating system somewhere else. You've left your images, most commonly in the downloads folder, and you saved this somewhere else, and then took just this InDesign file, put it on a flash drive, and moved it to a different computer. And that is by far the most common error I see when people try to export documents. The way to fix that, if that is an error, is that you're going to need to replace all of these images. Every image that you put in, you're going to have to replace it. Now you can do that, find out which images are missing if it's only some of them. You can go to Window, and go to Links, and this will tell you all of the linked files. So for instance, our chili file is here, our all of the photos are where they're supposed to be. If I go into Images, and I'm just going to take this one out and I'm going to move it into this folder here. Now we see this link is broken. The image is moved and it's no longer where InDesign was expecting it to be. So if I need to fix this, now I need to click on this. We can double click. It's going to open this up, and now I can tell it, okay, well, the image is now here in this other folder instead. So click open, and it'll re-import it, and it should keep the same placement and everything. I'm going to go ahead and move it back where it's supposed to be. And then we'll do that again. You see it shows up this little question mark missing, double click to relink, so we'll double click and we'll find it here in the images folder. And it was the dessert image right here. So click open and it will relink. That's by far the most common issue that I see, and remembering to keep everything organized is what people probably run into the most with InDesign, because it is very different from the way Photoshop and other applications work, is that it's all linked instead of actually embedded. All right, so now we're done. We're ready to go in terms of packaging our file. So we've done the export for the PDF, but a package is something that you would use for archiving and making sure that you've got everything together into one place. You would also package files so that you could send an entire package file, including all of your fonts and your images and everything else, to the printer or to a client so that they have everything that they need to work with it. To do that, we're going to go to File, go to Package. And since I've already kept everything organized, it's not going to do much for me, but if you haven't kept your stuff organized, this will bring everything into one folder for you. So it's going to take everything, links and images, 5 links found. So it's going to take all of those links and put them into a single folder along with an exported PDF and your InDesign document. It's going to bring all of our fonts in there as well. It's going to bring all of our linked images. If we're using any special inks or anything like that, any Pantone inks, it's going to bring those settings in as well. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and package. It says yes, we need to save it. We're going to tell it where we want to put the package, and I'm just going to put it in the same demo folder with everything else. And by default, it just leaves the same name of our file, which is demo, and then adds the name folder. So we'll click package. There is a restriction on copying fonts from Typekit. So since we're using these Typekit fonts, it's going to say restrictions apply. You're required to comply with applicable copyright law. Since we're using Typekit fonts, which yes, we're not going to break the law, so we're just going to say OK. And what it's going to create is this new folder right here, our demo folder, where it's got all of our stuff in there. So again, it's got a PDF using the settings that we established with our previous PDF export. It's got a copy of our file. It's got a copy of this IDML file. And then it's got all of the links to our images, our full-size images. So I can take this entire folder now and I can send it to my printer, or if this is my finished, this is the last submission for client, I'll send them this entire folder so that way they can archive it and they have access to all the same files that I used to create it. So that's the basics for InDesign. I hope you'll find it's useful for putting together things. I use it for all sorts of stuff, from presentations to just organizing work to demonstrations for critique and just putting together packages for clients and things like that. InDesign is really, really handy. And it's really, really powerful. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. Some things it does better than others. But again, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with InDesign. All right. Anyway, hope you found this helpful. If you have questions, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next video.